All right. So, hi, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Necessary Conversations, presented to you by Felicia Sherrod.
Hey, everybody. My name is Ashley Ullman. I am a founder and inclusion consultant of Allied Folk, where I essentially do organizational development and youth programming that's really centered on next generation equity. And then through Amoja, I am an education lead and have been for, I think, about 2 years.
I wanted to, just coming off of the heels of hearing the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial, I wanted to come together with you and talk about our feelings and talk a little bit about how we can inspire conversations as adults with youth and with other adults in our lives that may be uncomfortable. Um, but these are necessary conversations that need to happen, from toddlers that are seeing everything and feeling all of the emotions of the adults to the 8-year-olds. You want to add to that?
Just thinking about, I really appreciate the invite to just come speak on, my feelings, my perspective. It's been a long year from last May until now, and even before, of course, last March until now. So yeah, I guess the only thing I wanted to share as we're kind of gearing up to have this dialogue is just that I hope that the listeners of this podcast take something away, whether it be hope for what's next, or resources or ideas for what folks' involvement. Like there's lots of folks who are like, I want to get involved, but I don't know how or what. And then another thing I was thinking about when it comes to folks, especially the youth, if you're listening to this, I just, I think a lot about you, and like what it must be like to be a young person in this day and age and through all these historical moments in time. And so I want, especially the youth listening, to know that there's a place for you in all of this, and that whatever it is that you've been feeling or curious about or wondering about is okay. So hopefully, as we're sharing that dialogue, that's what people listening will walk away with.
Yes, and I share those same sentiments. So let's get started. Ashley, how are you feeling? We're 2 days out from hearing the verdict of the Derek Chauvin. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but we're 2 days out. And I just want to know, how did you feel in that moment when you heard the verdict? And how are you feeling today? Did you sleep well that night? Better than you slept in a while? Just overall.
I mean, first and foremost, for the family, it's like, if 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 my family were going through what the Floyd family has gone through on a global scale, right? I mean, it's like, it's unimaginable, even just the pain that they've endured, but then to be in a global spotlight, I really honestly cannot imagine any of that. So the first thing that came to mind when I heard the verdict is, I mean, obviously there's no justice, right? Like, what would be justice would be them having their loved one back. So I do remember just thinking, at least the person who did this is like being held accountable for what happened. As far as bigger picture, what does this mean to me, as far as like moving forward, or the relationship with, policing and community moving forward? you know to me, like, the one bad apple, or let's hold bad apples accountable, is not it. And it's always been about addressing the roots of, change and what needs to be different in order to prevent, right, another George Floyd or another Dante Wright. And the list goes on and on. So that's kind of where I've been at since then. It's like, I'll be honest, like probably most people, I was shocked that accountability is what the jury decided. I think we all know that far too often what should happen and the system that's been designed to do certain things does not always end up that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I was definitely, just struck with shock, I guess, like just shock and dismay. I wouldn't call it happy for the family, but again, grateful that the family, I guess, I don't even know the word, like grateful that the family is at least able to know that the jury did the right thing, right? And that, like, it sounds, I mean, from based on what we heard in the trial, like most people didn't do what they were supposed to do, but at least the jury did what they were supposed to do for the family. And then, yeah, my sights and I don't think I've gained better sleep because the work that has yet to be done is still the work that has yet to be done. So, for me, it's like, yes, let us continue to chip away at the system that needs to hold people accountable for the things that they do, but also let us be proactive in preventing these things from continuing to happen.
Absolutely. And I think that is what a lot of people are feeling and saying. I'm hearing a lot of that. Like, okay, this one person has been held accountable, but there's still so much work to do, especially when you wake up the next day, or was it even the same day?
Same day.
And that teenage girl, like the first response should not be to murder, to kill, to use lethal force to take someone down. And there needs to be a complete evaluation, in my opinion, of the police system as a whole, and how they operate, their training, their mental health. I was just talking to someone who visited the gallery, and we were talking about how she works in mental health, and she's like, I see so many cops' wives in my chair. Domestic violence is huge. And so I look forward to more change. I look forward to the government as a whole, the president. I think he made a statement saying that they're going to look into these systems countrywide, nationwide. And so I hope that that's really going to happen. How I felt, I knew it was going to happen. I knew that he was going to be guilty. There was no doubt in my mind. And I kept saying, they're going to find him guilty on everything. They're going to give him everything. The fact that it only took 10 hours, they're like, dude, no, you're wrong for what you did. And I just felt it in my heart that it was going to happen. I would have been highly disappointed had the verdict not come back that way, but just assessing how the world reacted, reflecting on how Minnesota reacted, reflecting on going out to those rallies last summer that were so exhausting for me. But to be there and to see the amounts of people that came together, the unity, the unification, it was insane. I've never seen anything like that before. And I was like, okay, we're done. We're tired of this. We're tired of it. And maybe it took COVID for everybody to have to sit down and like there's nothing else that we can do because of COVID. We're all locked in, locked away. And so we have time today to watch all of these videos, to be constantly like forced to oh my gosh, police brutality really is real, for those who didn't believe us before, even though we'd been saying it. But now we're seeing it daily. One of the other things that I thought about is our ancestors, and not just the African American ancestors, all of the people from the allies, white allies, Asian allies, Native American allies in the past that are no longer here to witness this. I thought about them. I even thought about Rodney King. And those cops were literally on camera whooping this man. I can't even believe it. And I just thought, man, if he were alive to see this. Did you go there in your mind, like thinking of the work that has been done in the past, the backs that we stand on, the torch that we carry?
Definitely that last part. Definitely that last part. I reflect often on civil rights leaders and political change makers, and And I wonder sometimes, like, if we could go back in time and tell Martin Luther King Jr., like, it's going to be until the year 2021 until a white police officer is held responsible criminally, right?
Yeah.
Uh, for taking a Black person's life. You know, it's like, obviously, and I struggle with that so much. I feel, I don't think I'm the only person that feels that way, right? But that's kind of how, not for me anyways, it's not showing up as cynical in a way that's making me less hungry for the next step. But at the same time, um, I feel like it shouldn't have had to take this. It shouldn't take Black and brown sacrifice. It shouldn't have taken generations to get to this point. That said, by no means do I mean to diminish or minimize the hard fought blood, sweat, and tears, right? Work, sacrifices that were made to get us to this point. And so I've been sitting with that a lot, kind of like balancing my, my feelings of cynicism with like kind of just trying to like validate that so that I don't slip into feeling guilty, but then at the same time kind of being like, when it really struck me, I think, I've heard that saying, like, we stand on the shoulders of the people before us. And where that really, really hit home for me was the contrasting pictures of protests against racial violence throughout the generations. Like, I don't know if you saw those, but I just kept seeing, like, people would have pictures of, a protest here in Minneapolis in 2020 or wherever, they were everywhere, Belgium and wherever. But it was like the contrasting specifically of the boots on the ground and the work that people have done here was like really powerful to me, to be like, we are fighting the same fight,
Yep.
and so I do think for me, I think what you're kind of getting at is like, yeah, this one is for y'all. Like, this one is not just, I mean, it's very much for the Floyd family and for George himself, but we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of the fights that had been fought up until this point, right? And like,
Absolutely.
I don't know, I've even been reflecting a lot on, I wish I could remember the legal commentator's name that spoke on this the day of the verdict, because it was so powerful. But this Black woman, I believe, was like, basically, let's be clear, the people in the streets are what got us, that really changed the trajectory of this trial. Like, if you remember, the charges that were supposed to be filed or whatever, like they lessered the charges, right? And then like people were in the streets outraged. And then they brought back murder too, I think, charges. And then there were a couple of other things that they were kind of talking about how, oh, I know what it was, to switch so that Keith Ellison was overseeing, the case. And it's like, I think that those are the moments in time, yes, including the verdict, but there was just so many moments in time where the work that was being done paralleled, these like Black leaders and community leaders and activists that we've learned about and stood on for so long. So I don't know, it was something about, you know, um, it was something about seeing that activism in action, really reflecting our past, that was like really powerful for me. And so by the time the verdict came, I did feel very grateful that, especially for folks who have been alive for all of those moments in time, right?
Yeah.
For those folks especially, like, I just like, we owe these wins, like we owe these to them too.
Absolutely. And not just the people, um, the protesters whose names we can name, not
Mm.
just the protesters who get the spotlight. I actually kind of have a beef with some of the celebrity protesters, and people that popped in right after George Floyd was murdered, because I personally, and I want to take this time actually to mention their names. Um, a gentleman by the name of David Banky. He is an ally, and he's been doing this work, police reform, prison reform, particularly, and just wanting to dive into that prison system and how we treat crimes, and how we punish American citizens based on race, socioeconomic determinations. Like, he is doing the work, and he was out there. And then you have Chantel Allen. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she is doing the damn thing, and has been,
And has been, and that's
and
the important part, has been,
yes.
has been.
And I want to take the time to make sure that people know her name. She is also serving on the board of St. Paul Public
School
Schools.
board.
And so this is
You
passion.
don't know me, but I know you, Chantel. Shout out.
Yeah, I know her, her wife actually. So, so yeah, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned those names. And my brother, who Antonio Williams, he came home actually last year after doing time in prison, and he did quite a bit of time in prison, and has been all about police reform, has been all about prison reform, and again, a lot of that same work that David Banky does around, we got to figure out how to really serve inmates. Is it about punishment, or is it about, you know, changing these people and making sure that when they come home, they are productive members of society? My brother came home just last summer, and he's been out in those streets doing the work to create change and make change. And so I want to thank all of those people, the nameless ones, everybody on those cars. Listen, I may have my judgment from time to time, but I really try to reserve it, because I'm not doing any of that. You know, I went to a couple of rallies and was exhausted emotionally, physically, mentally. And so I thank you all for that work. And hopefully someday we can recognize you in like some sort of a ceremony or something we can do for these folks, because they are the ones who made this happen.
I want to speak on to that same point, similar point. Another thing that has been that I've been experiencing a lot of gratitude for is BIPOC and marginalized identity group solidarity. You know, like I was just watching some coverage by Georgia Fort, independent Black woman journalist here in the Twin Cities. And she was, I believe it was at a gathering this week outside of the courthouse, I think is where they were, if I remember correctly, but seeing people from different groups represented who are there in solidarity. And that is something that, you know, coordinated efforts and, you know, like coalitions is not new, but I feel like over the last year, and I do think a big part of that, for a lot of people has been because of COVID. It's like, oh, snap. Like when we've got like multiple different public crises happening at the same time, and the same groups keep getting farther and farther and farther from resources, right? Or power, or whatever it is. I feel like I saw a lot more for me. And I could be just new to the party, but I saw a lot more of that, especially in youth, which I think is really powerful for what this movement continues to look like moving forward. And you know, that realization, I think, that our liberation is in our unity, and that infighting, or you know, group fighting or whatever, like if we're fighting each other for scraps, we're not making progress towards, you know what I'm saying, shifting power. And so that, like I said, I mean, I'm not trying to downplay or minimize, like I said, coordinated and efforts and coalitions that came before us, but it has been really powerful to see the youth really lean into that. And it's just been, I on a whole other level, they seem to understand what solidarity means, and what you know, that kind of trope, strength in numbers. You know, it's like they really seem to like really understand that in a way that I've never learned about generations doing that, you know. And so I just think that is such a beautiful thing. And like we owe it again to the people that came before us, but the people that are younger coming behind us too, you know what I mean, to like really do our part now more than ever, to keep that going. Like I hear this from time, like the next generation will save us, or like and I don't feel like that's fair for us to like step aside and let them inherit what we couldn't solve. And so I've just been feeling really inspired by, like you were saying, the elders, the ancestors, the voices, and the strength of the people that came before us. But I also really feel compelled, to keep fueling, this movement specifically for the youth that are coming behind us too.
Absolutely. And it gives me hope, like you, seeing the young people out there. It also gives me hope seeing these videos that sometimes come across my Facebook newsfeed of little white kids who don't have to say anything, but you see them correcting their neighbors who may have a whatever that Southern flag is that should never be hanging, Confederate flag that should never be hanging in someone's yard, especially if you're a Northerner, and then claiming it has nothing to do with racism. I love seeing videos like that of kids like checking their friends and not being afraid of that. And so we have a few minutes left. I want to go into how can the youth, this is a message for you all now. How can we empower them to have these conversations, uncomfortable or comfortable conversations with friends that either look like us, don't look like us? We just need you all to continue to watch us, but also know that eventually we have to pass that torch to you all. And you will be old enough and legal and able to make some different moves and better moves than we were able to make based on the resources that we have at this time. And so, what do you think? What's some advice to the young people?
A couple of things that come to mind just from my, reflecting on my youth years. Number one, surround yourself with people who make you feel strong. And these days, it maybe that's not necessarily all the people on your sports team or all the people in your classroom, or maybe it's not even necessarily a bunch of people from your community, but it's like outside, however it is that you're connecting with people who make you feel strong and empowered, I think is really, really important. I did not do that until I was older. I didn't understand the power that had, and like how being around people who don't make you feel strong actually then kind of takes away from your energy, and so that I think would be one thing. Another thing that I've seen lots of youth do that I would encourage the youth of today to continue doing, that I did not necessarily do, is I believed that the grown-ups were the bosses. I believe that the grown-ups knew best, and we were taught by generations before us that there's a hierarchy, there's an order of things. You're not old enough, you couldn't know. And I kind of like what you were just talking about, Felicia. I'm seeing a lot of kids, all different ages, all different backgrounds, being like, my opinion matters too. I might be 12, I might be 20, but we have an inherent sense of right and wrong in our bodies, regardless of how old you are. And so I would just encourage youth that are listening to this to lean into that, and don't feel like because you're young, that you have to be quiet or you have to be silent. And then I would just say also, ask questions. We live in a time where it's starting to become more normal. People that do, a lot of the work that I do in equity and inclusion work is all about like teaching grownups basically how to normalize difficult conversations, how to get used to getting checked on your bias or that kind of thing. And so, we're a lot of us grownups are doing our best to get the grownups caught up. But in the meantime, y'all deserve to have answers, and you deserve, to have your questions answered too. And so, I feel like, again, like the farther you go back in time, the more taboo that used to be. Like, oh, we don't talk about that. Or like, that's grown folk stuff. Don't. And so I would just say that would be my third thing, would be ask questions. You deserve to ask questions. You deserve to know what the people around you think. And so that would be my third thing.
Thank you. And I agree with all of that. I would like to go into mental health and how one of the things that I want to encourage you, I second everything that Ashley said. I want you to feel empowered, ask questions, all of that stuff. The other thing that we want you to do is take care of yourself. All of this madness that you are seeing around you is going to take a toll if you just pretend that it doesn't happen. You may find yourself sitting around and eating maybe more than you've ever eaten before. I know I did that. And then I look up and I couldn't fit any of my jeans. And I realized, oh my gosh, instead of crying, I started maybe eating a little more. Or I was arguing with people on Facebook. And then I'm exhausted from arguing with people on Facebook. And I don't, it's like that doesn't help. Yes, you want to, you got to combat racism on all fronts. But I recommend before you do that, make sure that you're responding after you've checked yourself. Make sure that you check in with how am I feeling right now? Am I emotionally like depleted? Do I even have the energy for this right now to go back and forth? Because sometimes people just want to argue, just to argue. And you have to know that you can't change everybody's minds. And so make sure you're checking in with you. Make sure that you know that you feel good, that you are okay with having this debate. And if it doesn't feel good, you back out.
That's really good advice, Felicia, because there is almost like this feeling that comes sometimes, like I have to keep going, or like this responsibility, or and I think that I just think that is a really, really good point, that mental health and checking in with yourself honestly should be at the step number one. And take care.
Bye, guys.